All right, well, we've got 14 of us here. People can join in. Yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. Thanks to everyone who is here right now. This is awesome. So throughout this conversation, I might ask questions and they'll come up as a poll on your screen and you can just answer them. And then, yeah, whenever we post this, you'll see some of those responses. This is being recorded, it's just an FYI. And so this will be posted later on our Facebook page. And also it sounds like VSA will post this as well. So yeah, hopefully that doesn't hinder you from asking the juicy questions that you're hoping for. So we've had a surprising amount of new people come to our IDYP events. So I'm just going to give you guys a quick overview. And that's one of the questions I'll ask is whether or not you've done one of our events before. So we're a young professionals network. We're based in Auckland, but right now we're in the process of expanding to Wellington as well. So if you're down there, that would be really cool if you could join our events. And then eventually we hope to expand to some other major cities in New Zealand. So we've been going for about 2 years. We were originally a network that sat under the Council for International Development, but now we sit as an independent nonprofit. So we are registered as a nonprofit organization. So even though we've been going for 2 years, this is our first year as a registered nonprofit, and our second AGM is coming up in September. So one quick announcement that I want to make is that we are doing these fun TED Talk style events. So I don't know if you guys have seen TED Talks, but they're basically 18 minutes or less speeches on a random topic. So the way we're doing it is 10 minutes or less on anything related to international development. And you have 10 minutes to speak. You can present it in a video form, PowerPoint, whatever you want. And you'll be about 6 people speaking total at our AGM. It's kind of fun because you get to meet people. So we always make sure that we invite high-level people within the industry who can see your speeches. So it's a really great way to get exposed and kind of get your name out there. So last year we had the CEO of Oxfam. We had I think the partnerships manager from MFAT. We had the HR director from World Vision. So it really is a great opportunity to get your name out there, especially if you're looking for employment, and you can speak on anything you want related to international development. So if you're interested, get in contact with me afterwards and I'll give you more details about that. And it's also on our website if you want to do it. This year will be the first year that our AGM will happen from all around New Zealand. So we will do it virtually as well as in person. So if for whatever reason you can't be in person, but you still want to do a speech, let us know and we'll see if we can figure out how to work that out. And then also, a lot of us will not be running for the board again this year. So if you're interested in joining the board, you can, again, get in touch with us. It's idyp.nz@gmail.com, or you can go to idyp.org.nz/recruitment, and you can see details on the positions that are open there. So I'd really, really encourage you guys to get involved. We have a lot of fun, and we throw some really cool events. So yeah. And then the last thing I have to say is that at the end of this event, if you could just go onto our website /feedback, so idyp.org.nz/feedback, that really, really is useful to us. All of our events, we take from the feedback that you guys give us, and unfortunately, we don't get a lot of feedback. But not a lot of people fill out the survey. So really, really want to encourage you to go on there and do it. It's only a couple of questions and it's super useful. So yeah. So yeah, welcome comments in the chat box. I don't know if you guys know how to use Zoom, but there's a little chat box. If you put your comments in there, Morgan will answer them as we go. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Morgan. This is going to be an awesome talk. So as you guys have probably seen from the post we've been making, Morgan is currently I think the program manager for the Solomon Islands. So she's been in that role since 2019. So thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, if you want to get started.
Cool, thank you, Danielle. Kia ora katoa. My name is Morgan, as Danielle introduced me. Now I'm just setting you up my double screen here. So if I'm looking off in that direction, don't get distracted because my notes are over here so I can look at your faces. Yeah, so as Danielle indicated, I'm the current country program manager for the Solomon Islands for VSA, and I've been there since February last year. I am at the moment back in New Zealand. My family and I were back here on holiday when the borders started closing. So for now we are here and just waiting patiently till we can return to Honiara. So the way I want to structure my talk is to discuss a little bit about my background and kind of the pathway that I took throughout my early career to enter into the kind of international development space. Because I think that hopefully will be of interest. And then I'll talk a little bit about VSA itself, kind of where we work, how we work, and what's happening now. I want to touch on kind of the benefits of volunteering from both my experiences and my my association with VSA, and kind of how that can help shape your early development careers. And then talk about a couple specific elements of that that are probably quite relevant for me personally, but I think probably relevant for a lot of people. And then a little bit about kind of where people I know have ended up that were volunteers. And lastly, what does all this current context mean for someone looking to do international development and doing volunteering? And I think that will be a great segue to talk a little bit about Matt's experience as a volunteer and where that's taken him. And then I'd be keen to get his thoughts as well on kind of what does someone who wants to follow that pathway do given the context we're in now. So I'll just go back to my notes. So, and like Danielle said, pop some questions in and I will attempt to multitask and answer at the same time, or we can come back at the end, whichever kind of seems to flow better. Right, so I'll start out with a bit of kind of my story and the path that I took into working in international development. So I'm originally from the States, if you haven't picked that up already. So I finished my undergraduate degree in 2007, and I graduated with a bachelor's in international studies, and I did some language as well, and had spent some time living and working in Europe. And then I randomly met some New Zealanders and decided to come here on my OE. So I came to New Zealand, and while doing just a bit of kind of working in bars and things like that, I also ended up volunteering / interning with Amnesty International. So this was the really kind of the seed that sparked my interest in human rights and international development work. I fast forward a bit, I came back to New Zealand after a period of time and did my master's development studies at Victoria University. And I spent a bit of time on my way back to New Zealand. I stopped over in Fiji for a couple months and did some volunteering, interning with Transparency International Fiji. And that was organized privately, just kind of through contacts that I had rather than any formal volunteer internship avenue. So I'll touch back on kind of that networking and things like that later. But that was my first purview into development in the Pacific, for example, and that really sparked an interest for me, spending that time in Suva then. So I finished my degree and graduated in 2011. And I don't know how familiar you guys, many of you will be about around that time, but it was a really uncertain time in New Zealand's development sector. So just in 2009, NZ Aid, the aid program had been reintegrated back into MFAT, and there was a graduate hiring freeze. So there are no opportunities to segue into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And then in 2010, the NGO sector funding in New Zealand was also in a really uncertain space. There have been some massive changes to the way that MFAT funds international NGOs and civil society organizations. So essentially what that means is for a period of time there, as soon as I graduated, there were very few opportunities in this sector for people. So I think a lot of my friends and the people graduating with me were looking at going elsewhere, going overseas, obviously because that was an interest of ours. But so I was left job hunting for kind of peripheral opportunities around the margins of international development. While I was job hunting, I managed to pick up another kind of volunteering / internship opportunity with UNICEF New Zealand. And help them draft a report on the visibility of children's rights in the aid program in New Zealand and some of their policies and programs. So after a period of time, I was hoping that would lead to work. It didn't. But anyway, I did manage to then pick up a job with Statistics New Zealand. And it's probably, it wasn't an area I ever expressed any like significant interest in, statistics, official statistics. But I got involved with the census, the 2013 census, and I got engaged on a massive stakeholder engagement program and doing a lot of work around how to ensure that the data that was collected through the census how important that data was, ensuring communities understood that how important it was, and shaping the way it was disseminated so that the communities that needed it could use it usefully. So that, again, another segue that I wasn't expecting, but that created a newfound appreciation for the importance of official statistics, which I'll touch back on in a little bit later. In 2013 then, after the 2013 census, my partner and I moved to the Cook Islands. He had a job there, and we moved there together. And I found myself unemployed again for a brief period of time. So before I went too crazy, I decided I would volunteer with the Cook Islands Red Cross Society there. And I did some policy development work for them, developing an internal child protection policy, which was at the time a new requirement from the Australian Aid and DFAT in order for funding to be received. So after a few months, I managed to pick up a job there with the Cook Islands Statistics Office, and that was because of my past experience working with Stats New Zealand. And while working for the Statistics Office and the Cooks, I was charged with coordinating what's called the National Strategy for the Development of Statistics, or the NSDS. And this is a process supported by a number of development organizations in the UN for developing statistical capacity across national statistical systems in lower and lower middle income countries. The purpose is so that you have a nationally owned and produced supply of data for the SDG indicators, but also for your national statistical needs. So that gave me the opportunity into the Ministry of Finance with the Cook Islands government. And after another year, I moved into their development coordination division and became a development program manager. And my role there was to oversee certain bilateral and multilateral partner funding that was coming into the country. So I think I was responsible for the Chinese aid program, which was very interesting. Program, as well as some Australian funding and some other multilateral partner funding. And there's some really great opportunities to work with a broad range of some of the various ministries, as well as community organizations that were receiving some of this funding from development partners. One of the big things that I got out of that role was those opportunities for from both the program manager as well as the statistics role, was that opportunity for cross-cultural stakeholder engagement, hosting massive workshops with a number of statistics stakeholders, and then, like I said, engaging with various ministries and beneficiaries of different development funding. So that was a really great opportunity to kind of hone those skills further in a new country and context. After a while, my partner and I moved back to New Zealand, and I started working as a consultant with an organization in New Zealand called Martin Jenkins, mostly in the kind of policy management, monitoring and evaluation consultancy space, predominantly with central government agencies. And that gave me the opportunity to really learn some new skills around being agile, collaborating with a variety of new subject matter experts, applying some of those stakeholder engagement and analysis skills, but to new subjects that I hadn't been involved with previously. So I did some work with Veterans Affairs, with Winnikokiri. I think I did some with culture and heritage. So quite a few different areas that I hadn't been involved in before. And that was really what I was looking for, some of that variety and kind of breadth as well as depth. So I did that for a few more years. And then in 2019, my family and I moved to the Solomon Islands. And I had secured the job with VSA before moving, and that kind of came about because while I was working as a consultant, I managed to bid for some work for VSA, and I helped them develop. So I didn't get the job because I was doing that work. Let me just be very clear. I can see Trisha. Hi. I did this piece of work for VSA, helping them develop an assessment framework when they're looking at entering new locations. And that gave me that opportunity to meet VSA, show them what I could do, and then when a job opportunity came open, I was able to apply for it, and after a robust process, fortunately got the job. So that's my story, and I've been in the Solomon Islands and with VSA since 2019 as the program manager. I'm not going to go into the details right now about what that entails. We can talk about that a bit later if you'd like, though. So I would just want to talk a little bit now about VSA and what it is, how it works, where it works, and things like that. So VSA is New Zealand's largest and most experienced volunteer agency working in international development. So it was founded in 1962, and Sir Edmund Hillary was VSA's founding president. I know they have been in the Solomon Islands since, I want to say, 1965. So most of that time they've been working in the Solomon Islands. But they also work across Melanesia, Polynesia, and at the moment Timor-Leste. And I think we still had a volunteer in Cambodia until very recently. I got the stats today, and just prior to repatriating all of our volunteers due to coronavirus, we had about 95 volunteers on assignment across Cambodia, Cook Islands, Fiji, Kiribati, PNG, Bougainville, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Timor-Leste, Tonga, Vanuatu, and as well as some e-volunteers, which would be New Zealand-based volunteers supporting partner organizations in some of those countries. The way VSA works, which I think is really important to understanding what differentiates an organization like VSA from a number of other, a broad range of kind of volunteerism organizations and opportunities, is it's really focused on skills transfer and knowledge transfer. And it's about ensuring that volunteer assignments and opportunities are identified locally by the partners that we work with. They're relevant for the local context, and they're delivered there with the partner organizations by our wonderful volunteers. And the goal of all this is so that when someone comes, shares their knowledge, shares their expertise, that knowledge stays there and is a sustainable kind of long-term capacity building opportunity. But it's a mutually beneficial opportunity, I think, also. So volunteers also expand their horizons through volunteering. My experience in the last year is, it's a broad range. Some people have entire epiphanies during their times there. Other people, I think, learn a lot about themselves that they didn't realize. But overall, I think what I've experienced so far is it's a really mutual beneficial opportunity for the volunteers and our partners we work with. Those partners they're very diverse, and they're driven by a diverse range of development needs. So we work with regional and central government agencies. We work with local and national NGOs, education, health bodies, businesses, schools, colleges, health clinics. I'm trying to think off the top of my head of my kind of group of volunteers that I had there. We had a real range. We had a yoga instructor who was also looking at nutrition and supporting the tourism industry there. We had a number of tourism advisors. One of them is on this call at the moment. What else? We had people working with central government. We had people working with local NGOs. So it's a real broad range of those kinds of opportunities and skills and expertise that they bring with them. And as I alluded to earlier, due to coronavirus, we had to make the hard decision for the first time in VSA's history to bring back every single volunteer out of our countries back to New Zealand, just due to the uncertainty around travel restrictions and kind of implications on health systems, and didn't want to be any undue burden to some of these already vulnerable health systems in some of these countries. So for now, we've temporarily put deployment of volunteers on hold, and we're hoping to be able to get volunteers back out into the field as soon as it's kind of been given the green light. So until then, I know VSA is going to continue to build a talent pool of prospective volunteers. And if you are interested, you can always go to the website and check out and see what kind of opportunities and assignments that we've been working hard to develop with our partner organizations. Yeah, so a little bit just about the benefits of volunteering, both from my experiences as a volunteer myself, as well as through VSA and my association with them. Like I said, volunteering provides a lot of opportunities to develop and hone skills that are relevant to you and your partner. So it's a mutually beneficial, in my opinion, opportunity. And it's really critical, in my opinion, that it be mutually beneficial, because a lot of times when you have a situation where a volunteer is getting more from the opportunity, say stuff to pad their CV with, then the partner organization, that's where I see a real failing of the model. So that's what VSA and myself and my program management colleagues work really hard, is to ensure that every assignment that we develop is locally driven, and it's not what we want the partner organization to assignment. It's not what we want them to develop. It's what they want to develop, and we work together to make it match well, I guess. Other benefits of volunteering is obviously the adventure. I think that's why a lot of people look at it. You know, it's challenging yourself, stepping outside of your comfort zone. I mean, a lot of people think, I've traveled, this is easy, or I've lived in England for a year, I can do this. But, you know, it's not really until you are faced with having to walk 45 minutes in 33-degree heat uphill to get home after your 8 hours in an office that didn't have running water. We were like, this is definitely challenging me in my comfort zone. And what that pushes you to do is to become or be even more resilient, to innovate, you know, work with your colleagues. You know, if you don't have access to the same kind of technology or the same resources you might be used to working in New Zealand, what do you do instead? And how do you make what you have work? And how do you do it in a way that is with dignity, so that you're never making your colleagues and your partners feel like they are any less than what you're used to? And in general, just challenging yourself and pushing yourself, like I said, out of that comfort zone to try new things. Volunteers bring with them a large set of skills and experience and knowledge. Even like our very recent university grads bring with them like a breadth of experience with, you know, they're really used to research and analysis and getting things done really fast. And sometimes you have to tell them to just wind it back and slow down and focus more on the relationship building first. But everybody brings with them a set of skills that can be exchanged. And I'm not going to lie, it's a great networking opportunity. So whether that's networking with your fellow volunteers, networking with some people in the expatriate community, networking with local and international NGOs and things like that. So it gives you those opportunities, like Danielle was saying, not only showing up to an event, but people getting to know your name and your face. And that's really important, because I think my experience in New Zealand and the Pacific is, you know, that networks, the people you know, are really relevant because it is a small place. And then obviously, I mean, this is no surprise, I think, to anybody, but volunteering offers you a great opportunity of what you do between jobs. So now is maybe a great example of people are faced with job losses or a lack of jobs available. You know, this could be a great opportunity to say, okay, well, let's focus on volunteering for a bit and see, you know, shows that you show initiative and that you've got interest in certain things, that you want to volunteer, that you care, that you're passionate about. And kind of in relation to that is one of the big points I want to make is that it's not just about volunteering for your kind of classic development organizations. So I know your previous seminar was with someone from the UN talking about UN volunteering opportunities, and those are fantastic. And organized VSA or other similar organizations, great volunteering opportunities, because I think you get a number of those things I mentioned before. But I would really stress the importance of looking at peripheral sectors for your skills and opportunities development. So things like health and education and water and sanitation, good governance, engineering, women's and human rights, conservation. These are all, you know, when you think about what is development, these are all the things that make up development. You know, I think you can always focus on M&E and what are good development principles, and you should always do what you can to practice them no matter what you do. But the real needs, in my opinion, are in some of these kind of peripheral sectors that may not be classic development, but are actually what make up the foundation of good development. And in some ways maybe are more relevant. So I think getting experience and qualifications in these sectors actually can give you a really strong foundation on which you can build a development career. And I think it's important that, I've got a note here, it's important that you're you're always giving as well as receiving from, like I said, that mutually beneficial relationship. So I think it's critical. And if I look back on some of my experiences, I think when I was an intern with some of these organizations, I questioned whether I actually gave as much as I got out of the opportunity. So putting a bit of a critical lens there. So I just thought in relation to this concept of this peripheral sector, I would give my example, which to me is my work with Statistics New Zealand, which was not something I ever anticipated, but that gave me the pathway into the Cook Islands Statistics Office and supporting the national strategy for the development of statistics. And then that further led me into my work with development coordination as a program manager, and now into some of the work I'm doing. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is what else can you do other than strictly looking to be, get a degree in international development like me, or, volunteer with the UN or some of these agencies that, there are lots of other opportunities out there that I think are equally or not maybe even more relevant. So I just want to touch on a couple things briefly. So like I said, my volunteering experiences, if I look back, someone questioned me the other day if I had any volunteer experience, and I thought, oh yeah, I've done a bit. And then when I was sitting to prepare for this presentation, I was like, okay, I've volunteered or interned with Amnesty International New Zealand, Transparency International Fiji, Transparency International New Zealand, UNICEF New Zealand, Red Cross New Zealand, Red Cross Cook Islands. So that is quite a few organizations over time that I have volunteered my time, for no money. Which I would say, whether it's an internship or a volunteering opportunity, are pretty similar. And the other thing that says to me is the majority of those were not in a developing country or overseas. A lot of them were here in New Zealand. So there are great opportunities here in New Zealand. Now, what I can't ignore is the fact that I do have a partner who also works in international development. So that's meant that fortunately we've been able to accommodate our career progression together. Which has been helpful. It means that we can kind of co-network, which has been really good as well. So a lot of his former bosses are good friends of mine now in the development sphere and such. But it has required us to make these choices together about our career options. So for example, the decision for us to move to the Solomon Islands wasn't made in a vacuum, because we knew that there were going to be more opportunities there than in some of the other posts that he might have considered. So I guess the point there is, I don't want to ignore the fact that I did have this element in my life that was already closely involved in the development field. But it also meant that we had to work together to make sure that we were both kind of meeting our career progression needs. And I'd like to think it's worked out. And the last point I want to make before I go into kind of where volunteering can lead you is just the reality that I don't know if many of you are facing this right now, depending on where you're at in your careers, but the impact of work life and family balance. So I have a 3-year-old daughter. She runs around upstairs and you hear her. And I know a number of women who very readily will tell you that it can be hard getting into and moving kind of horizontally in the development sphere with young families. And the options can seem limited when you have a partner or when you have a family. It's not impossible. I'd like to think I'm somewhat living proof of that. And I know a number of other young men and women in a similar situation. But you have a number of new considerations that you don't have as a single person, or if you have a partner and no young family, like are you moving somewhere with access to healthcare, access to education, security issues, etc. So it does create a new layer of conditions to consider. But it's not impossible, and you might just have to think about working a little bit differently. So I know a woman with a young child, and she and her husband moved to Samoa for some work for her, and he decided to stay home for a bit to look after their daughter while she worked full time. I'd like to think we're all moving in that direction where the joy is equally shared between partners. So it's not only a relevant thing for women. And the last point that I want to make is that I think it's important to challenge anyone that says it's not possible or that it is a limitation, and to push back if someone says that you can't do this if you have a young child or a young family. And even more importantly, is once you're on the inside, is to advocate for progressive organizational policies, advocate for progressive parental leave policies and flexible working arrangements and work from home opportunities and things like that. So, yeah. So where can volunteering lead you? I tried to do a bit of a deep dive into some data from VSA about where do our volunteers go after they volunteer. And I know we're going to hear from Matt shortly to hear about his pathway, which I'm really excited to hear about. Unfortunately, we didn't have that data readily available to deep dive into. So instead, what I'm going to tell you is just a few anecdotes. So in the Solomon Islands, where I currently look after, I can tell you, for example, the former New Zealand High Commissioner, he's just recently left last year, was a VSA volunteer in the Cook Islands, granted 40 years ago, not sure how long ago. The current public solicitor also was a former New Zealand VSA volunteer in Niue. And the current Commissioner of Lands was also a VSA volunteer. And I think he also volunteered possibly with the Australian Volunteer Program in PNG. I'm also personally aware of a number of MFAT staff and colleagues at Post as well as Wellington who are former VSA volunteers. I mean, other options are moving into kind of independent or consultancies with a number of organizations, as well as, you know, moving into various public service roles and national and international NGOs. So I don't have any specific case studies on this. I'm going to leave that for Matt. But what I just want to note is that there are a number of people that have moved from volunteering and into a variety of roles. And I'm sure there's even more than what I just briefly touched on. So the last thing I want to say, and then I'll segue over to Matt, is just about, I think the kind of elephant in the room is we're talking about the benefits of international or overseas volunteering, and we're all faced with, you know, how long our border is going to be closed. And I don't know the answer to that question. VSA doesn't know the answer to that question. So I tried to think about, you know, what is VSA doing and what can you or your friends or your colleagues do in the meantime? One of the things that VSA is doing at the moment, because there's quite a bit of strategic work going on behind the scenes about who are we, what are we now, what are we in the future. And one of those elements is e-volunteering, remote support. So we're setting that up with a number of our return volunteers and looking at how we can continue to support some of our remote, some of our partners, organizations back in the Solomons and other countries. And there are definitely some tweaks that we'll have to work through, but I think there are, you know, the world is moving in a direction where hopefully we can start to utilize technology more. In the Solomons, for example, we've just got the undersea cable that's turned on in February. So fingers crossed that means improved internet access, which means more people will be able to use FaceTime and Zoom and WhatsApp to communicate. So there's still a lot of people who won't be able to support that approach, but for those that can, we're looking at those opportunities. You know, and this is a massive disruption of what we're used to, and we're gonna all need to look at how do we adjust to this new normal. And I think young people, people early in their careers who have that maybe more flexibility, but also kind of a bit more tech savvy might be best placed to really lead the innovation that we need. The other opportunity is domestic volunteering. I mean, like I alluded to earlier, is a number of my volunteer internship opportunities were New Zealand based. There'll be such a significant need and value placed on volunteering. I mean, if you just think about some of the volunteer armies, the student armies, student volunteer armies that came out of Christchurch, and the work that they've been doing in the last couple of weeks here. There are so many opportunities to gain cross-cultural experience with kind of local community organizations and within your own community. And there'll just be, there'll be a big demand, I think, for social services moving forward and support in these areas. So I think the key thing is find an opportunity. If you want to consider domestic volunteering, find something that resonates with you, that you're passionate about, and think about some of those peripheral experiences. So, you know, if you're really interested in recycling, you know, look at kind of waste management and recycling opportunities in that space here in New Zealand, because that is a massive issue in countries like the Pacific and other developing countries, and those types of skills are they're in need here, and they're even more in need overseas. I mean, if human rights is your bag, then, consider supporting or volunteering with the, community law centers and things like that. I volunteered with Red Cross here in New Zealand to support a former refugee resettle when she first arrived here. So these are all great opportunities for you to get to know some people, network, develop new skills, learn how to support and engage with people that might be a little bit different than you and the like. So that's kind of my jumble of information. And what I want to do now is just lead over to Matt, because I'm really keen to hear your volunteer experience story, where that's led you, and kind of any thoughts that you have on what someone interested in this topic now might want to be planning for themselves in the coming months, years.
Yeah, and just real quickly, I just want to cut in. One of the reasons that so when Morgan and I were talking and prepping for this conversation, I was thinking about the chat that we had with the UN and how like it's quite competitive. And if you're put in this environment right now that you can't get that like very relevant overseas experience, like that, when she's talking about that peripheral experience that you can get, that's what I'm thinking of, is making yourself competitive even if you can't go overseas. And when we had this chat, there were a couple of elements that came up that we thought were key to this overseas development that you should be looking for here in New Zealand if that's what you're going to opt for. And it was around language skills, cross-cultural skills, and what's the third one? Do you remember?
No.
But anyways, the point that I want to make is that if you can position yourself to think of these skills and gain them here in New Zealand, that you almost are making yourself more competitive by showing that you're proactive. And you can use that when you're talking about yourself and you're having this interview, like, look, I really wanted to go overseas, but I determined that there were these these things that I needed to gain that I couldn't do overseas. I did them here instead. And showing that proactiveness is almost like a step up for you. So that's where that kind of comes from when we were having this conversation.
Yeah, agree.
Sweet. Matt?
Hello everyone. The last time I tried to talk to more than 10 people at a time was actually in PNG, and I nearly got heat stroke on stage and nearly passed out in front of like 200 people. So this is fun. Actually, Danielle, could you maybe do like another poll to potentially see where people are at, like if they're students, or if they're in the sector, something like that, just so I know who I'm talking to, I guess,
Sure.
a bit. And also, everyone's hiding from us. There's only like 5 of us we can see. You can come out of your hiding spots if anyone wants to. Hey guys, nice to see your faces. It'd just be nice maybe to ask questions and you can raise your hands and stuff. Hello. So who is a student? Can I get like a hand? Development student? Any? Yeah, so there's a few development students, and I kind of want to, well, I guess social science students potentially. So, okay, well, a lot of Wellingtonians. Is it cold? Is it windy down there? So yes, my experience with VSA, I was a Univol volunteer. So Univols are university volunteers. So my background was, I won't try and tell my life story, but I've kind of always wanted to get into international development. My mum's a union organizer. I've always had this social minded background, and I kind of wanted to get into, development, but I never kind of knew how, because I'm not a doctor, I'm not a teacher, I don't have these hard skills that I can just go to a country and help immediately. So I did my undergrad in political science, went down to Wellington for my postgrad, and I ended up doing a postgraduate diploma in development studies. I didn't lock myself into the master's for the second year because I kind of knew maybe writing a thesis wasn't for me because it's hard. Academia is hard. I like learning, but that many words was scary. So I just did the diploma year and kind of left it that. And after this diploma year in Wellington, so that was 2017, I learned about VSA, learned about the Univol program, and applied for VSA. The process for me as a university volunteer, it's relatively, quite extensive. You're sort of up against other young people, young graduates, to get a spot for the Univol program overseas. And so I went through that, and I was placed in Papua New Guinea, Bougainville. So I went there 2018, came back halfway through last year, 2019. So I was there for about 16 months. Best thing I've ever done in my life, easily. Amazing experience. And yeah, it's a balance of kind of everything. As Morgan said, I think most people end up saying you get a lot, well, you sort of get a lot out of it. You don't just sort of give your expertise and skills, you sort of do gain a lot. I learned languages. I've made so many friends. I felt like I knew the whole island of Bougainville by the time I left. It feels like it's kind of sort of like a second home for me, and it's a place I know I'm always going to return to now. I had it's just, you can't really express in words the sort of experience you get out of volunteering with VSA. That's not to say every volunteer's experience is perfect. For myself, I found the first 2 months hard, and I was thinking, what have I done? I've committed to 10 months. So a Univol assignment is 10 months. And I was thinking, shit, I've committed 10 months. This is hard. And I just stuck it out. After 2 months, I just loved it. And then I extended and stayed longer and longer. And yeah, it gives you a sense of, I've done this. I've always wanted to work in international development. And now I know I can kind of do it. I know I can sort of kind of do anything because of this experience. I made a list of a few, the networking opportunities through an experience like this are pretty incredible. I worked with or networked with the UNDP MFAT, DFAT, which is Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Australian version of MFAT, JICA, which is like the Japanese development arm, embassies, World Vision, ADRA, Plan International, grassroots NGOs, the PNG government and Bougainville government. So I networked and got to work alongside these big development actors. I felt like just this random student from New Zealand, but I was with these big development actors and I was learning so much every day, on top of learning languages and meeting local people and getting to understand local issues that mattered to them. So yeah, it's a bit all over the show, but you gain so much. And for me, I was at the juncture of, do I do a master's year or do I do something myself a bit more practical, like a volunteering year? And I did this volunteering year instead of doing my thesis, and I felt it was a very beneficial experience. And yeah, something I guess Morgan touched upon, that before I kind of delved into VSA, I was a bit, it was a kind of a sort of hesitancy I had with it, is I guess that word volunteer, it's kind of become, with volunteerism, it's kind of can be seen as a dirty word, I guess, at times, because there's so much volunteerism out there. And I've done some volunteerism. I went to South America for 5 months when I was 20. What does a 20-year-old know about helping people? And I thought, I'm going to go and help. Or no, I wasn't that naive, but I kind of thought, oh, this will be cool. And I came out of it thinking, oh, did I really help or did I make things worse? So I kind of had that experience with that word going into VSA, and I can assure you it's, the best, like, very good development, very best practice sort of development, all locally owned, problem analysis from local people, all sustainable development. It's pretty incredible. And yeah, so it's just, yeah, you sort of get stuck in and you sort of really do just sort of, yeah, find your way with it. And it's pretty incredible. Any questions? I don't know. I'll just keep yarning. So maybe if anyone wants to ask a question, I don't know, Danielle, what do you think?
You've touched on that before with us about the pace of things. Could you maybe talk about that? I know that, I've done Peace Corps in Ukraine and things go a lot slower. And I'm guessing you had the same experience. So maybe talk about what that was like.
Yeah, so, it's massive work and life adjustment, doing a volunteering sort of experience or year. You can't, I mean, if you do decide to volunteer with VSA, they sort of do make it pretty clear that you're going to have to adapt your expectations quite a lot. You kind of want to have this expectation of going to a Pacific Island country and getting stuck in and making changes and helping people straight away, but you have to adapt to their work conditions and everything, and how they work. So it can be very frustrating at times because, I mean, from my experience, my boss didn't turn up to work for the first month I was there. So I was thinking, okay, like I just arrived to this place. What am I doing? Like my boss isn't here. And he was in his village, sort of sorting out a sorcery incident that had happened. So I was kind of like, oh, well, this is so different than what I know. So you really do have to adapt your expectations. And yeah, it ebbs and flows. It's sort of, you just have to sort of, you're not going to save the world in a 10-month assignment, I guess. And it's just about learning along the way. And I think the perfect thing with a Univol experience, which is the student sort of VSA assignment, is that because you're young and you just want to sort of give things a go, it's really easy just to roll along with it and sort of just get the most out of it if you put yourself into the situation, immerse yourself in the culture with the people, language and stuff. So it kind of doesn't matter. I mean, you know, your assignments might not always work out in terms of the partner organization you're with, but the Univol assignments are really just about getting that initial experience into it. And I guess actually something I should say is I now work for the Leprosy Mission New Zealand, which is an international NGO, and we work in Asia Pacific. So we work in Nepal, India, PNG, Bougainville. So I get to now work in Bougainville again, which is where I was for a year and a half, and Indonesia, but in Ethiopia. So where I work now is directly related to my experience in PNG. And it got my foot in the door. It gave me confidence to think, you know, I can do this. And it let me refine, I guess, my understanding of what development is and the different roles that you can do within development. Because if I was being honest, I think, yeah, I said earlier, I kind of went into development thinking I just want to do this, but I kind of don't know where I might fit in this all. And when I was in Bougainville, I did fundraising, I did proposal writing, I did comms, I did monitoring and evaluation, I did a range of development stuff. And then I realized by the end of it that I really liked the program side of things. I liked designing and implementing development programs. And all the sort of nitty-gritty details of that. So I sort of learned about where I fit in this all. And now I am a programs officer with the Leprosy Mission. So I'm working with MFAT and getting funding from them with the Leprosy Mission to hopefully get some more funding to implement more programs in Asia Pacific. So, and many other volunteers I know from my sort of class, I guess, now have roles in development. The guy I was living with, my best mate there, he works with the Ombudsman's office down in Wellington in the international development arm. So he's gotten a job from his VSA assignment basically. So yeah, it's a perfect networking opportunity. And I mean, you learn so much about yourself, get to meet new people, make friends. It's incredible.
Yeah, I would echo that volunteering overseas is a really great opportunity to get a feeler for where you would fit within international development if you're unsure. And we're actually going to have, I think our next event will be around that topic, and I'm getting to chat with people from all over the sector. But if you're not sure where you want to be, you get to do everything when you're overseas. So it's a great opportunity. I just want to pick up a question that's in the box here from Hope. She was wondering, either one of you, I guess, could answer this, but how do you manage your finances when you're volunteering? And did you have any part-time jobs when you're, volunteering overseas?
I can comment initially. So like I said, most of my volunteering opportunities were self-funded. So I'm very jealous of people who get paid to volunteer. But yeah, I worked part-time jobs, bartended, cafe, restaurants kind of stuff, mostly bartending. So I distinctly remember late nights working at a bar on K Road in Auckland, going home, waking up early to go to my full-time internship job at Amnesty International the next day, and then leaving at 4 to go bartend. And that was just my life for a while. So I think, yeah, you've got to figure out a way to do it that kind of works well for you. And I do think there is an element, an argument that can be made that having the ability to volunteer could be seen as a privilege. But I think, if it's something you'd like to do and you can make it work, it's a great way to continue to build new skills, build your network, get to know other types of organizations and what they're doing, see if that's for you. Just like kind of Matt was saying, is going overseas, you get to kind of test out, do I want to work for a small community-based organization? Do I want to work for this central government agency in a developing country? Things like that. So that was my experience of trying to support myself.
Yeah, I might just say, and the finances with when I was living in PNG was, I mean, VSA give you a monthly allowance, and you get all the costs are paid for, basically, all your travel there, your living costs are paid, and you get a stipend for when you get back. So it's like $250 a month, I think. So you get a bit of money when you're back in New Zealand. So there's essentially no costs at all from your savings or anything when you're there. So the whole 16 months I was there was all free, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on that comment that he's made. So I think, VSA's approach and organizations like VSA is they would like this to be a cost neutral opportunity for people. So we want people to come focus on their life and their volunteer assignment and not be worrying about costs back in New Zealand. So it's not an extravagant stipend by any means. I can't remember what it varies by country to country based on local living costs, but it's enough to cover your home, your accommodation, your food. There might be a bit to kind of get around with, but it's not going to fund your holiday in Bali.
Awesome. So when I did Peace Corps in Ukraine, we had very intense cultural and language training. Do you guys provide that through VSA at all?
So yeah, that's a great question. So the process for, if you think about the volunteer pathway, I've got it sitting here just to remind myself, but essentially the first step that we do for everyone is develop those assignments in country with the local partners, and then we recruit based on those needs. And then when someone, a candidate is selected successfully, they come into our Wellington office normally for I think it's a 4-day long briefing. And that's an opportunity to meet other volunteers that are going to be going out either to your country or other country at the same time, going over a number of different subjects. So it's been a while since I took part in one, but there's opportunities to talk about kind of that cross-cultural experiences, things that might be a big no-no in New Zealand, but in the country and might be a norm that you're experiencing for the first time. There's also, what else do we do? There's lots of different opportunities to kind of start to really tease out things like, start to tease out from individuals like, you may never have been in a situation you've been so challenged out of your comfort zone. So what are your mitigation strategies going to be? And I think the point that Matt made earlier was really good about he didn't feel, for the first 2 months, he really felt like, oh shit, what have I done? And what I tell all of the volunteers when they arrive in country, so they do this briefing in Wellington with our colleagues, with my colleagues and staff in Wellington. And then when they come in country with me in Honiara, they do a week of kind of even more locally specific kind of briefing. So we talk about health and safety, we talk about security, we talk about how do you get around, we talk about, they do language lessons. So in the Sols, they do 3 hours of language lessons a day for the week that they're there. Then they get to typically go for a bit of a kind of a village experience. We take them to a local village and they spend a week in there and get to know the family that hosts them and kind of get a feel for what village life is like. And it's slow, and some people thrive on that and they think this is fantastic. And other people are really confronted by the fact that, the host could very happily sit there and just sit there and talk for 48 hours straight. And it's a real kind of immediate, oh wow, this is going to be interesting. So that's kind of, I would say, that 3-month period when they start, that's the period when I tell people, just don't worry about work, which is challenging when you're on a 3 or 6 month assignment. But don't worry about work in those first 3 months. Just focus on building your relationships with your neighbors, with your colleagues, with your bosses, with random people. All you need to do in those first 3 months is meet people and build relationships and build trust. Because if you don't have that foundation of trust between you and your colleagues and your counterparts, it's going to be really hard to do any of that capacity building at a later date. And that's something that, I've been in a number of jobs in my life where I've had my bosses say, I don't expect you to know what you're doing for the first 6 months, and I don't expect you to feel confident until you hit the 12-month period. And I always think back on that and think that's good advice, because that first 6 to 12-month period is just about learning the ropes and building relationships and trying to figure out what you're doing. And then in the second year, you can really start to make changes. So, and that's the same in a volunteer assignment. It's all about building relationships. And I'm going to keep going, sorry. But one example that I want to give of an assignment that kind of went a bit haywire, but actually had the exact outcome that VSA wants from what we do, is I had a really lovely woman who was working. She was on a 2-year assignment with an organization in Honiara, and she was helping them develop a number of new policies and procedures to really kind of professionalize. And then I think about 14 or 16 months into her 2-year assignment, there was massive leadership change. And basically the new CEO decided he didn't really care about anything that she was doing, didn't necessarily throw it out, but kind of sidelined her significantly. And she had been working with a manager in this organization. And shortly after this new CEO came in, he made the manager redundant. And this volunteer came to me, and she was, understandably upset about, all this hard work she put in, all the support and the mentoring for this manager. Felt like it was all out the window, and she didn't feel like she could continue supporting the organization credibly. So we ended up kind of pivoting her to another organization that also needed similar support. And the best outcome ever was that organization needed a manager in the same subject area that this other woman is. And she had applied for this management job in this other organization and managed to get the job. And I was talking to the volunteer, and I was saying, you're not solely responsible for that career progression, but your mentorship over the last 16 months probably not only upskilled her, but gave her the confidence to apply for a new, better paid job. And that will have long-term impacts on her friends, on her family, and kind of her, her household income and her confidence and things like that. So that kind of capacity building happens at an organizational level, but also happens at an individual level, as well as kind of the big, countrywide, regional, international level. Yeah, I forget what the question was, sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just, at one point you touched on security, and I was wondering if you could speak to that a little more. And just a quick background. So my husband and I served and met in Ukraine. And when we were there, I don't know if you guys remember that plane that went down over Eastern Ukraine, and then the battle or the civil war that started as a result. So we were right in the center of where all that happened. And we didn't actually get evacuated because we left months before it started. But when that kind of thing happens, how is that security taken care of? And then also on that same security question, how are things like gender roles taken care of? It's a single female that I would be more at risk, or if you're gay or something like that. How do you guys deal with those security issues?
Yeah, I mean, obviously security is a really important issue that myself and my colleagues all have to consider on a regular basis. So we, as an organization, we conduct security reviews. We engage with kind of security experts on a regular basis to get advice and kind of help us conduct a review of the local situation. I mean, in the last year in the Solomon Islands, we had 6 house break-ins in our volunteer houses. Unfortunately, there's no credible crime statistics collected by the police, so it's hard to know whether or not this is just a trend that's occurring, a pattern across the city, or is it our volunteers that are being targeted specifically? Is it the neighborhoods they live in? I mean, there are a few kind of things that we know, like there are neighborhoods we know will never put volunteers in, or we advise them against going to. There'll be certain parts that we say, look, if you're going to go here, don't go there at night, or go with someone, or only go with a local who you're familiar with, for example. So security is part of that first week briefing that we do in country, and we talk about a number of the security considerations that everyone needs to take when they're living there. And one of the things I say to people is like, you need to be vigilant. This is in Melanesia and Solomon Islands, like I will stick out no matter how hard I try to act like a local. No matter how good my pigeon is, I will stick out. So I need to be constantly vigilant. And you don't need to necessarily dress like you're going to church every day, but you need to take kind of what you're wearing, where you're going, how you're acting, your behavior into account at all times. Don't wear that. I tell everybody, don't bring anything that you don't want to get stolen to the Solomons, because it can get stolen pretty easily. So leave it at home, leave it in New Zealand. And then when you're here, you've got to be vigilant at all times, and being vigilant all the time is exhausting. I'm sure you can attest to that, Danielle. It's very exhausting, and it's easy after that 3-month period to become really complacent. You're like, I've been here for 3 months, no one's mugged me, I'll be fine, or I don't need to leave. I can leave my door unlocked while I'm at home, it's fine. And then you come back and your washing machine is stolen somehow. So it's a constant conversation we have. There's a number of kind of behind the scenes processes that VSA as an organization undertake on a regular basis. As the program manager, I'm in constant communication with my counterparts in some of those other volunteer organizations, some of the other big NGOs, to talk about, what are your experiences, or the New Zealand police, or the Australian Federal Police advisors that are in there. So there's a layered approach that we take, and we just remind the volunteers that at the end of the day, just like if you were on holiday, you need to take personal responsibility for your security as well. So I will give you all the advice and recommendations, but it's up to you, to put those in practice.
Matt, do you have any comments on that, your own experience?
Yeah, it's security is, obviously a massive issue and concern when you go to these sorts of places. And I went to Bougainville, and basically there was a sort of a civil war for 10 years there that ended in 98 or 99. So it was a very sort of insecure feeling environment. But at the same time, it's a lot of judgment and common sense sort of stuff. But it is, I can only attest to my own experiences. And I'm not going to lie, I definitely had some things personally happen to me that burst my bubble of living back in New Zealand, stuff that I had never seen before, violence, things like that I was confronted with. That's not to say that's the norm of the volunteer experience, but I had some confronting things happen to me. And yeah, it's VSA's approach is they do leave you to it to a degree, but you're also very looked after and supported when need be. So I found it a very good balance between, I didn't have to send a report back to VSA every week saying this is the security advice that blah, 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 and do all these reports constantly. I was only sending a report, I think, once every 4 months. Well, it was pretty irregular sometimes, but they do look after you very well, and your program manager takes, they constantly liaisoning with Wellington and taking security stuff into yeah, into mind.
Sweet.
I'll just add a quick point to what you're saying, Matt, is one of the things that one of the support systems that we provide our volunteers is access to counseling services. And there's kind of you can free confidential access if you need it. And then if you need more, it can be kind of approved. And I encourage all the volunteers, that to utilize that service, not only just if your house gets broken into, but also, if someone, grabbed you on the street, or there's a number of kind of things that I think it's easy to say, this is just life here, I'm just going to bury that down deep and not think about it. And over time, it does start to project. So I encourage the volunteers in my program, and I'm sure my colleagues would in their programs, to, check in with a counselor every now and then and just say, I've had these experiences and I don't want them to simmer and leave me with the kind of a jaded feeling at the end of my time here. So I think it's really important. And I'm really glad that as an organization, we're so supportive of accessing that type of support for our volunteers.
Yeah, and I will say that from my own experience, you do get a huge level of empathy when you finally return and you realize, like, you were only there for 10 months. In my case, it was 2 years, and then you're like, oh, well, these people are living this for life. I mean, not that I ever felt like at risk when I was in Ukraine, it's like too much, but yeah, you do get a huge level of empathy. So I want to pick up a question I missed from Olivia earlier. So she said, do you think it's better to volunteer straight out of uni, or have you done some work so that you can bring more skills into volunteering job? And also, just one other thing, moving forward, if you have a question, feel free to just unmute and let's show us your face with the camera as well. So yeah, if you guys want to touch on that question.
That's a great question. There's benefits to both. So you've got the Univol pathway that Matt spoke about, and we have a number of Unigoals across VSA, and there's a number of organizations that do something similar like that. And the great thing about the Univol program is, while it is predominantly for recent graduates, quite often they're not just generic assignments like go sit with this NGO and they'll find something for you to do. We tend to, the type of Univol assignments that we develop are akin to kind of a standard volunteer assignment. So you might say, okay, we're gonna be placing people as social media advisors or media advisors, or I'm trying to think off the top of my head, like an M&E coordinator, things like that. So the Univol program with BSA in particular, while it is a program for recent graduates and youngish people, I think you can be, I want to say, up to 30 something and still apply for it. It's not just sending someone and hopefully they figure out how to be useful. That said, I do think if you're thinking from the perspective of what does the partner organization get out of a volunteer, someone who's got a bit more experience and expertise and skills that they've developed over time, those are the people that just have a few more tools in their kit that they can bring to the volunteering opportunity. So I don't think I'm on the fence here. I think there's great opportunities. And from an individual perspective, I think volunteering at a younger age is easier. To be honest, you have less baggage, both physically as well as emotionally and, intrinsically. So you can pick up and leave and you don't know things, which is easier to do than when you're a few years maybe into your career. But I think that few years into your career, if you've got that ability to pick up and go do something different for a while, if you've got a partner who's keen, or if you've got a young family that you can move with you, I think volunteering could be a great opportunity. I should note, sorry, VSA will tell me just to note that we don't currently allow for like children dependents to accompany volunteers, but partners can accompany volunteers to volunteer assignments.
Sweet. Yeah, I was gonna say, when Peace Corps, we had a bunch of people who just came out of college, but then we also had a huge number of people who were like mid to end of their career, like 50s, and actually we had a volunteer who was 84. So there's a huge range, and I would just say that, like, my experience, if you feel like you can go now, like, maybe don't say no, go for it now, because you don't know what the future is going to look like, and if now works out, then just do it. So yeah. So does
Yeah.
anybody?
So Danielle, it's definitely like a, if you feel ready sort of mindset, I'd say. Because I was univols, I think 20 to 30, something like that. And I went when I was 24, and my housemate was, the guy I lived with was a univol as well, and he was 20. So he was pretty much just finished his uni. And yeah, we both brought different things, different skill sets, different mindsets, really. Learned off each other, learned off everyone else. So it's kind of a very personal, sort of decision if you feel sort of ready. Yeah.
Sweet. Does anybody have any questions? I have tons I can ask, but let's see if you guys have any. No? Okay. So what kind of assignments do you guys do? Like, do you guys do health, education, teachers? Like, what are people going overseas and doing?
Oh, it is such a variety of stuff that we do. Now, VSA as an organization has kind of tended to move away from that classic sending teachers and nurses. There are still kind of maybe someone who might support a Ministry of Health, or it might be like a nursing college and things like that. But we tend not to send kind of those kind of core vocational roles that you've seen in the past. And I think the focus has really pivoted to supporting capacity building rather than doing. Now, given the current environment, there may be some changes to that. I don't know. It may be for a period of time we have to support more people doing to ensure that things keep moving along. But I mean, if I just think about the volunteers that I had in country earlier this year, like I said, we had a real broad range. So in the Solomon Islands, we had four key focus areas, 4 key sectors: tourism, youth, education, and governance. So we had a number of tourism advisors working with our provincial governments, working with kind of tourism operators as well, to either expand their product offerings or really look at, laying the foundations for tourism development in some of the less central areas. We also had people working in kind of more office management type roles, so HR, administration, office management. I had a couple roles, volunteer roles in the kind of media, so we're supporting the local broadcaster, supporting if anybody's familiar with SID, Council for International Development, the equivalent there in the Solomons with a media advisor. So he was going to really help them build up their capacity to communicate with their stakeholders and their members and get the word out about what they were doing, what they can do. So there's a real broad range. I'm trying to think off the top of my head what else we had. We had a couple of univols in kind of that youth space, supporting the youth arm of the city council. And we had some working with the big international NGOs like World Vision, in kind of an M&E area. So it's a broad range of types of things that people do. IT, that's another area. So when I was talking about those peripheral sectors, I mean, the reality is, for VSA assignments, they're really specific. They're based on needs, and those needs aren't typically, I need someone with an international development degree. I need someone who's got knowledge of IT. I need someone who can do youth development work. I need someone who can teach my staff how to use Excel better. I need someone to teach us how we can improve our supply chain management for this private entity. I was in the process of developing new assignments with a chocolate manufacturer, for example, and he was looking at bringing, he needed someone who could both help him with marketing as well as kind of farm management. So all kinds of stuff, all kinds of really interesting stuff.
So Matt, what led you to go to VSA in the first place? What was that process like? Like, were you asking the same questions? Who did you talk to? Who would you recommend people talk to?
So yeah, I guess my path to it was, I did my postgraduate diploma year at Victoria in Wellington. And I was just at a juncture between doing a master's year or doing something else, I guess. And VSA presented in my development class. So I actually didn't really know much about VSA or the Univol program before that. And a guy called Matthew came in, and presented about the Univol program. And as I said before, I did have a lot of reservations about volunteerism and things. And I decided to apply for it and went through the whole interview process and everything. And it was, really thorough and everything. And I kind of just thought it was a good fit for myself and what I wanted to get out of an international development career or try to start an international development career. So it was a pretty straightforward experience, I guess.
And how competitive is the application process for VSA?
So I believe in my class there was, there was 23 of us selected, and I think 33 interviewed, something like that.
Sounds vaguely correct. I'm not very familiar with the actual numbers for the Univol program, but yeah, we typically, I think last year we had developed around 20 to 30 assignments, and we had maybe 40 or so applicants. I remember someone saying it was the highest number of applicants we'd ever had. So yeah, I think it's pretty, it is, yes, you have fewer assignments than applicants, so it is competitive. In that sense.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, if you guys find that you didn't get into VSA or whatever, program that you've applied to, that we have a list of resources on our IDYP website where you can look for online volunteering or even overseas or here in New Zealand. So check that out. It's idyp.org and then go to the resources tab. So yeah, that's a great tab. We've updated recently with our last event with UN resources, so you can check those out. Sweet. Any other questions, guys?
I thought I would just touch briefly on one other topic now that I kind of see the makeup of who is joining the call. So it's quite a large group of people that are university graduates or early career. And I wanted to touch back on kind of the opportunity that I referred to, that I did my volunteering intern opportunity in Fiji and how I got that. And when you think about well, how do I find these opportunities? There's the there's VSA and there's the resources Danielle referred to, but there's literally, use your networks, call your mom, call your uncle, say, I want to do something. Who do you know? I just randomly, my mom in the US, in Texas, I said, look, I'm going back to New Zealand to do my degree. I want to do some volunteering. I'm thinking maybe Southeast Asia or something. And she said, oh, well, I know a guy, I think he was a friend or a patient of hers or something, and he works for this organization, Mercy Corps or something, which is a US, I think, Danielle, you might be familiar with it, Mercy Corps.
Yeah,
anyway,
based in Portland.
Yeah. And so I got in touch with him via email or LinkedIn or something, and I said, oh, I want to go somewhere. I'd like the opportunity to volunteer. And he said, okay, well, let me call around. And he managed to get in touch via his networks to someone in Suva working with transparency, and lined up this opportunity. And said, okay, if you're willing to pay your way, we're willing to, basically give you a desk and give you some stuff to do, and you get some experience. So, that kind of classic, it's not that it's about who you know, but it's about who you're willing to kind of, I guess, contact. And it might not pan out, but it never hurts to say hey, someone who knows someone at this organization, can you put me in touch? Would they be willing to let me do an internship for 3 months there? And you never know. And I guess quite a few of those networks that I've the contacts I've made through my networks over the years, I still stay in touch with today. And it's very cool. I attended the AVI, which is the Australian Volunteer Program. They do a regional workshop every year. And this past year it was held in Honiara. And they invited me to attend, as I work quite closely with them. And I show up, and there was a woman who was working at Transparency Fiji when I was there, I want to say 10 years ago. And we just randomly bumped into each other because we're both working in the same sector, and the Pacific is tiny. So those networks are really valuable. So use them, keep in touch with people, go to the networking events, introduce yourself. Don't be shy. I mean, the number of times I've shown up to like women's networking events here in New Zealand, gone straight to the director and said, can we have a coffee? I want to talk to you. I want to pick your brains about, you know, how do I be you in 10 years? So don't be shy, just get out there, you know, embrace your inner American, I guess.
Yeah, and actually I was just thinking, or inner New Zealander, but yeah, how we have it. I'd like to touch more maybe on how the skills have transferred over to your job right now. And for me, just from personal experience, so I speak Russian because I was in Ukraine, and I think that having that like on my resume, and it's a UN degree or UN language, so just keep that in mind when you're thinking about where to go, is that the language that you speak, if you can get one of the UN languages, that can always benefit you if you're looking to go in that career path. But yeah, having to be able to say that I speak Russian all the time, like, is really always like an extra tick. And that's the kind of thing that you can pick up from this kind of, you know, experience overseas. But could you guys speak a little bit to that, how those skills transfer as well? I know, Matt, you've spoken a little bit about the program management.
Yeah, so I mean, my assignment in PNG, I ended up working with 3 different organizations and essentially doing 3 different assignments, which is a bit unusual. It's not the norm, but I worked for a grassroots NGO doing grant management and community engagement for a grassroots NGO. So that taught me how to apply for grants, how to do reporting and monitoring of grants. And I acquired some grants for a grassroots NGO, got them funding to do and renewed their funding to do really important sort of grassroots programs. My second role, I was with World Vision PNG, and I was a project quality officer. So I was monitoring and evaluating big programs, namely one being a World Bank funded cocoa program, agricultural cocoa program. And that was multi-million-dollar program from the World Bank. I think it was over the course of 5 or 6 years. And I was just building capacity of the local staff to be able to monitor that program, especially the finances and all the data side of things. So that taught me a lot of monitoring and evaluating skills, report writing, and as well as just professional things like how to email, like how to use Outlook and be a bit more professional. And then my last role, I was with the Seventh-day Adventist Church of Bougainville. And I was again doing sort of grant funding and getting them funding for their programs. And that was a lot more of a networking job. And my role was to sort of connect them with partners to get larger sums of funding for their health and infrastructure programs they wanted to build, sort of community health posts throughout Bougainville. So that was a program, an assignment in which I learned a lot of sort of quite important networking skills. I was talking to JICA, which is the Japanese development program, and writing up big reports and liaisoning with them and talking with DFAT and trying to get funding. So, I mean, it sort of taught me a lot of the development side of skills, in which I was doing report writing, monitoring data, gathering data using Excel, as well as just intrinsic sort of professional development, in which I was sending emails on time and networking with quite high level development people, which before I was quite afraid of doing, because I was like, who am I? I'm just some graduate from New Zealand. But you're putting these quite advanced situations, I would say, for a young person, and you definitely wouldn't get that from my personal experience. At least I wouldn't be put in those sort of quite high level experiences by myself almost. So for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I was almost this like advocate and touch point for the church. And I was talking with, some like sort of government reps and things, and it felt like I'm a bit out of my depth, but I'm still just going to do this. So you get exposed to some quite interesting experiences and really sort of builds your confidence, your professional development, quite a lot.
Yeah, I would second that. You spend a lot of time talking with government officials and doing things that you would never be able to do that early in your career. And then when you go back and you can talk about those experiences in job interviews, it makes a huge difference. So, yeah.
Definitely.
Morgan, do you have anything to add to that?
Not really from my volunteering experiences, but kind of the opportunities that came out of the volunteering. I mean, I remember in my role with the Cook Island Statistics Office, basically, like I referred to, running a huge stakeholder engagement program with multiple stakeholders and agencies, with UN officials, and I was kind of the person that had organized it all. And then shortly later, then being in meetings with the Prime Minister. So, you know, those are opportunities that you won't necessarily get as easily or as early on in your career in New Zealand. Um, so, you know, if you come back to the question earlier about should I wait until I have a few more years under my belt to volunteer, I think, like Danielle said, if you can, go, you know, and you can always go again, you know, obviously it depends on your financial situation, but, you know, I think, you know, if you can, if you've got the opportunity and you think it's the right one for you, you should take it, because you're going to get exposure to a number of experiences that you wouldn't necessarily in New Zealand. You know, and that being said, I mean, if I think about another example of a volunteer that I've managed in the last year who he was a Univol, and he came and was supporting his partner organization in Honiara, and he came in kind of guns blazing, ready to fix everything in a 10-month period, or really he just really wanted to see an impact, which is, you know, really great. But we had to have a lot of conversations about slowing down and focusing on relationships. And about 6 months into his 10 months, the relationship that he had with his partners had totally broken down because he was so kind of ambitious and eager, and it created, he essentially had intimidated his partner organization, and they didn't want to work with him anymore. So it kind of took this kind of total deterioration for him to stop, step back, and just focus again on the relationship. And then things started working really well together. And then change in senior leadership, and basically everything he did got scrapped. And he came to me really upset about this. I said, you know, this would never happen in New Zealand, you know. And I said, this is exactly what would happen in New Zealand. You have a government for 3 years who pushes a policy in one direction, and then a new government comes in and they scrap everything you did for the last 3 years. This is just the more raw, rougher version with fewer kind of policies and procedures behind it than what you get in New Zealand central government agencies or regional government agencies. So you get you get these new experiences that you may not get as early on in your career in New Zealand, but you also get kind of condensed versions of those experiences you get in New Zealand, often in a slightly kind of more chaotic way. So, and, you know, at the time, you know, I don't mean to belittle his experience because it was a really emotional roller coaster for him. But I think in hindsight, he can look back on it. And, you know, I know when he left, he was like, I want to come back, but this time I want to go somewhere really remote. So, you know, I know he had a good experience. I know he learned a lot from it. I know it really pushed him significantly out of his comfort zone. But, you know, I think he came out of it significantly more resilient and ready to take on new challenges.
Yeah, that's a great story. It makes me think of when I was in Peace Corps, like around how women were treated. And it's easy to go in as like someone coming from, you know, a developed nation like the US or New Zealand, where women are more or less treated equally, and then go into a country where maybe that's not the same and say, hey, you should be treating women equally. But having that exposed, like, long experience with one culture and seeing why maybe the same structure doesn't fit into that culture is one of the things that makes you so competitive when you come back from these experiences, because there's very rarely do you get that kind of experience in the professional world here in New Zealand. Like, how can you expand your mindset so much and see how, like, there's rules of thumbs here in New Zealand that just simply will not work and you cannot apply in other cultures, and being able to like transfer that to a job. So yeah. Okay, so I want to get a little more personal with this. What was your, Matt especially, and also like Morgan, with your experiences volunteering, what's your experience like with volunteers? I mean, I know that for me, like, yes, when you're locally and you're learning about the culture, that's absolutely fantastic, but the relationships with the volunteers is like a whole nother element of it that's also equally as rewarding.
Well, I gotta be careful because I know one of my former volunteers is listening. No, just kidding. She's fantastic and she never caused me any problems. Hi, Tricia. I think Matt alluded to the fact that the program manager's role isn't just to create assignments and pay bills, and network with stakeholders and country. An important part of our role is that pastoral care, and there are times where that can be very challenging. And I would say on the whole, it's an easy, enjoyable part of the role, but there are absolutely times, and usually it comes from when a volunteer has experienced something really traumatic, and you're the person there that has to kind of help them pick up the pieces. And I think it has to be done with care, and it has to be done with kid gloves. But also sometimes you have to sit an individual volunteer down and say, I don't think this situation, I don't think this environment is right for you. And we need together to sit down and decide whether or not this is the environment that is really going to help you work through what you're working through right now. And in some cases, it might mean that the volunteer needs to leave and they need to go back home and they need to seek the care and the support, that they need, because these are very challenging, very vulnerable communities that we work in. And you're not going to be a help to that community if you're being a drain on them. And it's important that the individual focus on their health and well-being so that they can continue to have that mutually beneficial relationship with their colleagues and their partners. And you can't do that if you're not well yourself. So there have been some real challenges. And like I said, pastoral care is a really important part of my job and my colleagues' job. And I hope for the most part I do it well. There might be some times where I think people have higher expectations of me than I think I should be doing, and I have to set some of those boundaries. I had, for example, I had to say, look, at 5 p.m., I don't want to have to think about you if I don't have to, because you are my job from 9 to 5, and I am on call 24/7. So after hours, I like to go home to my family and think about my things. And unless it's an emergency, let's save it for tomorrow. So, I think it's a balancing act that a program manager has to try and set as clearly as possible and be flexible with, because sometimes people don't know if something is an emergency or not. And, so it's okay to say, this is an emergency and I'm coming to help, or this is an emergency, let's pick it up tomorrow. I don't know if you want to comment on.
Yeah, I guess I could talk about my personal experience, but when I was volunteering in Bougainville, there were about, I think, 7 or 8 other volunteers. So there would have been, I think, max throughout my time there, 10 volunteers at a time. And you obviously become really close with the other volunteers there, because it is your sort of, your bubble of back home, and being able to just relate in that sort of very casual, personable way. And you do end up relying on those around you. Where I was living in Bougainville, it was right next to the New Zealand Police, because they had a sort of development kind of program there as well. So we had a group of Kiwis that sort of did look out for each other, and we relied on each other. But I would say that can at times be too much of a crutch, I kind of thought, and you do want to break out of that bubble a lot and actually engage with the local people, go visit their villages, meet their family, sort of integrate yourself more. Otherwise you will just sort of stick back a lot more, and it's quite easy to just remain in the new sort of New Zealand bubble. But yeah, I mean, I was provided some pretty crucial emotional support from my program manager. So yeah, it's a really supportive environment, I found.
That's great. We had 500 volunteers in our country, so
oh, wow.
a lot bigger.
Wow, that's massive.
We had more staff than we do in Solomon.
Oh yeah, Peace Corps is huge. So yeah. But I think New Zealand volunteers are seen much more pleasantly overseas as compared to American volunteers. So You guys come from the right country.
Yeah, where I was, they didn't like Australians, and they loved us. So the Australian volunteers sort of had that next challenge to deal with. Yeah, it's tricky.
Careful, we're posting this online.
No comment from me, I say.
Any other comments, guys? Questions before I keep going? No? Okay. Well, I guess one of the last questions that I have is just what your experience, Matt, has been like once you came back. I mean, you had a job lined up, or did you have to search for it? Did you feel like did you? I'm curious because when I came back from Peace Corps, there's almost like a return culture shock when you come back. So yeah, what was your experience like?
Yeah, it was extremely hard. It was I found it very difficult. I didn't find a job straight away. You sort of question, like, I spent a year and a half doing this. Was it kind of the right choice and everything like that? But at the end of it, the experience you get and the perspective you gain from it is going to last you a lifetime. So I came back and I just sort of I guess did an R&R for a few months, and then it is just about using those networks when you're back here and just connecting yourself, and the sort of area I knew I wanted to work in, being programs, sort of programs area in international development, is a very small area within development, especially in New Zealand, because there's only usually 2 to 3 programs people per NGO, really. And a lot of the other jobs are sort of comms or fundraising and things like that. So I there wasn't a whole lot of job opportunities just listed online. So it was just about putting myself out there. And I got the job at the Leprosy Mission just from interviewing for another position, which was like a fundraising position, because I had been doing a few grant management fundraising roles when I got back from PNG, and then I sort of interviewed for this other fundraising role, and then they said, "Oh, probably aren't the best fit for this, but how would you like a programs role?" And I sort of said, "Oh yeah, that's exactly what I want to do with my life." So kind of all worked out, but it definitely is, yeah, reintegrating back's tricky. But I mean, yeah, the experience you gain from it lasts a lifetime. So I knew I'd sort of find my way eventually because I had succeeded in that experience. So you gain a lot of personal belief and self-confidence from it.
Yeah, I mean, the comment I would make on that is touches really closely on what you're saying, Matt, is I think with all these experiences and opportunities, whether it's, an internship, whether it's volunteering in New Zealand, whether it's volunteering overseas, go into it with a really open-minded approach to say, okay, I may not get a job out of this with this organization or any organization. It may not lead to anything concrete or tangible, but hopefully it will give you exposure to another organization to say, do I want to work for this organization in the future? Is this the organization for me? Is the mahi that I'm doing, is the work while I'm there, is that what I want to be doing? If you're volunteering as a fundraising advisor and then you realize, I actually don't like fundraising, I want to do programs, or vice versa. So see it as kind of those, see it as a journey rather than, I guess, a destination, really. Give yourself the opportunity to kind of experience all facets of the experience. And then, when you come away with that, okay, yeah, you've got the kind of traumatic re-exposure to your home community and life and time and things like that, and you've got the pressures of your finances, of course, but I would probably take a guess and say there are very few volunteers that will come about it saying, well, that was a waste of time, I didn't get anything out of that. You may not have got a job, you may not have made any money and saved any money, but you made networks, you experienced new things, you kind of got a better sense of the direction and the path you like to follow. So I think that's, if you come into it kind of with your eyes wide open, that's what you're doing. You're not, this isn't like a graduate internship with a finance body that you're hopefully will set you up for the long term. It's like I said, it's the journey. I think that's the best way to approach it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sweet. Any other questions, guys? All right. Well, then I'm going to link in the comments just a link to our feedback survey. If you could make sure you fill it out. This is going to be posted online if anyone is interested in watching it again or passing it onwards. But yeah, thank you guys so much for being here. This is awesome. It's so good to see you interested. Is anyone thinking about going in the next year or so? No? Well,
I'll put a plug in now. Just I'll look at the VSA website, look at the assignments that we're advertising. You know, even though you may think, oh, I don't have the skills that someone needs, keep an eye on there. There is a tab where you can express your interest, I think, and you can say, okay, I'm interested in roles in X, Y, Z areas. So, you know, fill that out, and then I think you get emails if, you know, if you're interested in comms roles, or if you're interested in wash roles. I can't remember what's on there. So check out, you know, submit your expression of interest, look at the roles that we're advertising. And if you've got questions, contact VSA. You know, don't assume, you, like with all job hunting, you know, don't wait until you tick every single box. If you're interested and you've got a couple of things, get in touch and say, look, I'm really keen to do something like this. Am I fit for this role? Because we've got some really fantastic recruitment advisors, and the best thing that they do is when they get a candidate that isn't maybe the right fit for assignment A, they say, hey, but I actually have this other assignment in country X. Are you interested in that instead? So, you know, the best thing is keep your eye out, get in touch, talk to a human being, and see where it can take you.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. My husband actually, when he applied for Peace Corps, he put, don't want to go anywhere cold. And then we went to Ukraine, which, if any of you guys know, it borders Russia and is freaking cold. Just curious, by the way, what are the countries that you guys cover?
Let me just quickly look at my notes again. So off the top of my head, okay. So Cambodia is a bit of a legacy program. I don't know a lot about it, and I don't know much about it, but we have had a couple volunteers in our Cambodia program, but not so much at the moment. So Cook Islands, Fiji, Kiribati, PNG, Bougainville, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Timor-Leste, Tonga, Vanuatu. Yeah, so I think as I mentioned, most of these programs are on hold at the moment, but we're still looking for volunteers. So as soon as we can get volunteers back in the fields, our partners want to get volunteers back in the field. So please, you know, what we don't want is 6 months down the line when we can start sending people back, we don't have anybody to send. That would be the worst case scenario. So yeah, get in touch with BSA, talk to our staff about, you know, how we can, you know, what might work for you, and just keep an eye on what we're doing.
Sweet. Yep. I will link all of the stuff in the when I post all this. So if you have any questions, you can follow those links. And then, of course, Matt is on our board. So if you want to get in touch with someone who's not connected to VSA, you could always reach out to us too, and then we can help answer your questions as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. If anyone wants to contact me about the Univol experience in particular, yeah, find us on IDYP, and I'm happy to answer any other questions. As people always have various different things like, you know, what do I need to bring, sort of blah, blah, blah sort of thing. So yeah, anything else you want to ask, feel free.
It's a hell of an experience, guys. So just do it, you know, don't overthink it. Go overseas. It's a hell of an experience, and it will change your life, at least from my experience. It sounds like Matt has had similar. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Stay.